God bless everyone. Amen. Let us continue into our lesson of the second book of Samuel. The second book of Samuel is where we'll be reading today. We are in chapter number 10. This chapter isn't fairly long, but it is a contrast to what we saw in chapter number 9. Second of Samuel, chapter number 9, we saw David wanting to show mercy to a man named Mephibosheth. And so now we're looking in chapter number 10. We're going to look at verses 1 all the way to 19. I believe is what it has, 19 verses. Yep, 19. So we'll be looking at the entirety of the chapter. And in chapter number 9, we found that David was in a position where he virtually had no enemies. Chapter 8, David goes on a conquest and he ensures his enemies are defeated. In chapter number 9, because David has no enemies, he goes ahead and shows grace, he shows favor. In fact, let's start in chapter number 9, because if we go to chapter number 9, verse number 1, so 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse number 1, we're going to see the similarities between this and 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1. Verse 1 and 2, to be specific. So look at chapter 9, verse 1. David asked, "Is there anyone remaining from the family of Saul I can show kindness to for Jonathan?" So in chapter 9, David is wanting to show kindness. Now jump to chapter 10, which is where we are reading today.
Sometime later, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun became king in his place. Then David said, "I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me." So David sent his emissaries to console Hanun concerning his father. However, when they arrived to the land of
the Ammonites, so we're going to pause there. We're going to read verse 3 in just a moment. But what we're seeing is that in both verse 1 of chapter 9 and in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 10, David wants to show the word which is chesed. Chesed. Right? Chesed. This word means kindness. But it also means mercy. It means love. It means loyalty. It means commitment, depending on the context in which it's being used. So here, in chapter 10, we see that the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun is now the king. Not only is he now the king, but he's mourning the death of his father. And so what David does is that he sends his ambassadors, his people that may go and that they may console him, that they may serve him in whatever capacity he needs them. And what we're going to see is that the Ammonite leaders, they didn't really react in a positive way. So just keep in mind that this is a man, Hanun, who is put in a position of leadership, but he is still mourning the death of his father. And his inner circle, I think, is going to take advantage of his vulnerability, of his emotional state. And we'll see this in verse 3. Look at verse 3. Verse 3 says, "The Ammonite leaders said to Hanun, their lord," so now he is king, so he is their lord, he is their king. They said to him, "Just because David has set men with condolences for you, do you really believe he's showing respect for your father? Instead, hasn't David sent his emissaries in order to scout out the city, spy on it, and demolish it?" And so we saw in chapter number 9 that David showed kindness, he showed chesed to Mephibosheth. He didn't have to. Mephibosheth was a Lodabar. He was someone who had been lame for the last 15 years of his life. He didn't have to show him any kindness. He didn't have to restore him back the land of Saul. He didn't even have to have him sit at the table with him. But instead, what we see is that David does follow through on his kindness. Now, David here in chapter 10 is doing the same thing. He's trying to show kindness. Instead, the Ammonite leaders, they're thinking that David is doing this because he's trying to get some intel. Now, here's something very interesting. David did not have to show kindness to Hanun. And the reason he didn't have to do it is because in chapter 8, verse 12, we see that when David was conquering all the lands, one of the lands that he conquered was the land of the Ammonites. So they were already paying taxes and tribute to David. So David, number one, didn't have to do anything to be kind to Hanun. And number two, he really didn't have to send spies to go see the city because he already had tags on the city. It was one of the land that he had conquered. And yet the Ammonite leaders are saying, no, David is doing this because he wants to spy on us. He wants to see so that he can take over. So clearly, these men are taking advantage, I believe, of Hanun's emotional instability. He is vulnerable because his father just passed away. He has a new leadership, so he doesn't want to look weak. He wants to look like a strong leader. And they're making him think, hey, David is not being nice. Instead, he's trying to insult you. You can't take this. Your dad wouldn't have stayed around for this, so you can't either. And of course, this is going to dictate the way that Hanun reacts. So we've already read 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 3. Now let's read 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 4, and we'll even read verse 4 all the way to... Actually, let's just read 4. Let's read 4.
Before we dive into that,
yes, please go ahead.
And along that thread that you were just expressing, they could have also jumped on the idea that there was a mutual agreement between David and his father, and not so that's now voided out as if it's like, okay, a new king, now you gotta establish something different. So maybe that mutual agreement or that alliance was there, but it ended at his death. So now, that idea of trying to take over, even though, like you said, he already got it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Ammonite leaders, the inner circle of Hanun, they were really getting in his ear and bothering him of, you can't take this lying down. It's like, take what? This kindness? And it's like, no, they're trying to take advantage of you. They're trying to make, he's trying to sun you, as someone would say, right? So it's like, but that's not David's intention. And based upon what we saw from David in chapter 10, when David goes out to show kindness, he shows kindness. Another thing is that chapter 8 also tells us that because of, this is chapter 8, like verse 14 or so, it says that David's reputation covered the land. So number one, he's defeating people, so people know, they know what he's about. But number two, his reputation has covered the land, so they know what he's about. And so he doesn't have to try to come through the back door if he's going to try to conquer someplace.
Right.
Again, the Hanun's inner circle, they don't really guide him well here. They don't help him here. They keep buzzing in his ear. And let's look at verse number 4.
So
Hanun took David's emissaries, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes in half at the hips, and sent them away.
So when we look at this, we have to remember a few things. Number one, David's intention was to show kindness. And so David had no intention to fight. David had no ulterior motives. He wasn't looking for a fight, but David wasn't afraid to fight. He wasn't looking for one, but he wasn't afraid to get involved in one. So we find something in verse number 4. Hanun took David's emissaries. He shaved off half their beard, cut their clothes, and sent them back on their way. I'm going to read it to you in a few different translations. That was the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. I want to read to you 3 more translations just so that we can really grasp what's happening here. So this is how it sounds in the NIV. In the NIV, it says, so Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off each man's beard, cut off their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. In the NLT, in the Living Translation, it reads, so Hanun seized David's ambassadors and shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their robe at the buttocks, and sent them back to David in shame. And in the MEV, which is the modern English version, so Hanun seized the servants of David, shaved half of the beard of each, cut their robes in half so that they were exposed, and sent them away. And so what Hanun does here is something very dangerous, because what Hanun does is that he listens to advice of people who are wicked people. That even when someone is showing kindness, they're thinking, this person can't be that kind, they can't be that nice. But, yeah, exactly. Those are the type of people that Hanun has around him. So truly there's an issue there. But what Hanun does is truly a difficult situation. See, what Hanun does is that he cuts off their beards halfway through. Now, by cutting their beards at half, they are disobeying the law, because their beard was supposed to be at length, and it's actually a symbolism. The symbolism is that in the year of rest, they were supposed to not catch the berries or any of the fruit that fell at the wayside, only that which was hanging of the tree. The reason is because that which falls at the wayside is actually something that God has allowed to fall, so that it may be providence for those who have none, for those who are poor, essentially. And so they let the beards kind of hang because of that. It's supposed to be a symbolism of that. In modern times, you'll see Jewish people where they'll have like the long twirls here. But it's supposed to be a symbolism of that, how God's mercy extends out to everyone. So by shaving half, they're kind of disobeying the symbolism. But even worse, in a way, it's even worse that he would cut their clothes halfway so that it would be at the buttocks, because they didn't wear undergarments. The Israelites didn't wear undergarments. So they had their full clothing, and this is how they would move about. So by sending them off this way, he would send them in shame. Not only were they insulted, not only had they essentially disobeyed their God, but they were also revealing themselves in their nakedness. So when they were coming into town, hopefully none of their kids saw them, because their kids shouldn't see their parents in nakedness. So otherwise it was even more shameful for the family. And so it was an insult, it was a huge shame, and it was a bad situation. Truly, what he does is a declaration of war. It is a declaration of war, but what we're going to see is the way that David reacts. Because the way David reacts, I think, is very telling of the type of character that we see from David. Look at verse 4. In verse 4 it says, when this was reported to David, he sent someone, this is verse number, verse number 5. Verse number 4. When this was reported, so 2 Samuel chapter 10, verse 5, it says, when this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them, since they were deeply humiliated. The king said, stay in Jericho until your beards grow back, then return. So meaning he didn't even allow them to come into the city.
That's months.
Oh yeah, it takes about.
It took me a year to get it this long. So it was there.
Yeah. So to get them a full beard is going to take no less than 4 months to get them a full beard, and the big variable is everybody's different, right? Nutrition plays a factor, genes play a factor, so who knows really how long it would have been. But notice that David doesn't even let them come to Jerusalem. He sends a messenger, meets them halfway or at some point, and says, hey, just go to Jericho, stay there until your beard grows back. And this is very interesting, because David isn't reacting quickly. Like David didn't say, they did this to you? Get dressed, let's go and fight. No. He says, go ahead and recover from this situation. And I think this is very telling because we're going to see later on that the way David is reacting rubs off on other people within his army.
Now, he sends soldiers there to consult, or just emissaries. What kind of ranking is that? What kind of position is that? Because one would think, okay, you send 5 of your guys over there. Well, what did if you send in your soldiers and you're like, hey, console them, but just be prepared because you don't know what there was an alliance, but show love, but be ready. They go over there and it's like, okay, if you could defend yourself, you would. Were these individuals able to defend themselves, based upon their ranking or position?
Yeah, so that's another reason why the cutting of the garment was so insulting. Because these individuals were servants of the king. So meaning that they served directly to David. Now, in these particular biblical times, everyone had a beard except for people that were servants or slaves. Or rather kind of the other way around, right? They had their beard, but many of them was a representation of their service, right? And so what we're seeing is that the other part of this is their garment, because their garment, they are servants. So that means that they're wearing royal garment. Their garment is a cheap garment. So it is a direct insult to David. Now the question of were they soldiers? Were they coming in a way that was no. They were servants. They were literally going there to serve the man who was mourning the death of his father. Right? David doesn't do this as a political move. David does it specifically as a move to try to be kind to him. And so there was no reason to be intimidated, to feel the threat. It's like if I have workers that work under me and you need help to complete a task and I say, go help them. It's like, all right, there should be no reason why, they should be treated lesser than or a different way. Hanun really is though being influenced by the wickedness of others and the skepticism. And so we now look at verse number 10. This is after they go to Jericho, they being the men that David had as ambassadors. They come back from Hanun, beard halfway cut off, clothing halfway cut off. He sends him to Jericho. Verse number 6, when the Ammonites realized they had become repulsive to David, they hired 20,000 foot soldiers of the Arameans of Beth Arab and Zobah, 1,000 men of King of Makkah, and 12,000 men of Tab. Now I'm going to read it to you in the New King James Version because I think it'll help us further in understanding what's going on here. This verse number 6 in the New King James Version says, when the people of Ammon saw they had made themselves repulsive to David, the people of Ammon sent and hired Syrians of Beth Arab and Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and from the king of Maacah, 1,000 men, and from Ishtab, 12,000 men. And so if we look at a total here, we're seeing 33,000 men, soldiers that were ready to go to battle. And so because we're seeing that Hanun was the king of a small city, of a small country, he didn't have the soldiers to fight against David. And so instead what he does is that he hires the Syrians to come and fight this battle for him. And so he understands that he's made a big mistake, but there's no turning back now. And so while David initially wasn't looking for battle, as I mentioned, David isn't afraid to go to battle.
It reminds me of a statement that 50 Cent made, where it's like, I don't want no problems, but if you want problems, no problem.
Right. Right, and I think that truly, when we look at David, I think this is the way we should be, in that we should be peaceful people we should be people who are meek and humble. But at the same time, that shouldn't mean that we're not ready to defend the truth, to defend the honor of those who are with us, or even of truly of the Lord, right? Obviously, the Lord of His Word, but even of the people that are with us. Like David is going to battle because what they did, they being Hanun and his people, they have insulted not only the men that he sent to be of servants, but they've also sent, humiliated and humbled all of Israel. And so David is ready to go to battle, and now he's about to send Joab. So I mentioned earlier that David doesn't react hastily. David sends these men to go to Jericho, to rest, to recover. They're probably there for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I don't know how long it may have taken each individual to grow their own length of beard to where they had it before. So they're probably soaking in this feeling of frustration, of irritation. But David seems to be calm, cool, collected. He isn't acting swiftly. If anything, he is allowing time to progress. And much like the hair on our face, much like facial hair, much like hair on our body, like there are these things that seem like it'll never come back, or that it's damaged forever. And it's like, nope, it'll recover. And so these men were going to recover from their feelings, from the shame, but the residue is not what we're going to deal with. When we look at verse number 7, David heard about it. He heard that the 33,000 men were being paid by Hanun. So Hanun is paying his taxes, because otherwise that's a different issue. But Hanun is paying his taxes, but he has also got enough money to pay for these mercenaries. So verse number 7 says, David heard about it and sent Joab and all the elite troops. The Ammonites marched out and lined up in battle formation at the entrance of the city gate, while the Arameans, which is the Syrians, of Zobah and Rehab, and the men of Tob and Maacah were in the field by themselves. When Joab saw that there was a battle line in front of him and another behind him, he chose some of the finest young men and Israel's finest young men and lined up in formation to engage the Arameans. He placed the rest of the forces under the command of his brother Abishai. They lined up in formation to engage the Ammonites. And so what we're seeing is that when Joab, who is the commander of the army, sees, they're ready for battle, he moves swiftly and he creates a plan. This is the same Joab that killed a man not too long ago. This is the same Joab who we kind of seen that, he kind of marches to the beat of his own drum. He's known he has power and authority. And, we've kind of seen him use that influence to his advantage. But the interesting thing is what he says in verse number 11. Because in verse number 11 and 12, this is the moment where Joab is speaking to the army. So Joab, when he arrives to the battlefield, he sees the formation. He and his brother, who is also a general, they're setting up the army to get ready to go to battle. And as they're getting ready to go to battle, these are the words of Joab. Joab, who at one point kind of moves to the beat of his own drum, but it seems like hanging around with David's face maybe had rubbed on Joab, because Joab says, if the Arameans are too strong for me, Joab said, then you will be my help. However, if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I'll come to help you. Verse 12, be strong. Let's prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of God. May the Lord's will be done. So this is a man who initially was kind of moving in his own pace, but David, the king, seems to have had an influence on the way that Joab is moving. So obviously they are not moving based upon their own emotions. Notice that they are not really wanting to fight. Israel doesn't really want to fight. David's army doesn't really want to fight. David sent people to console Hanun. Those men were sent back embarrassed. David waits until their beards grow out. Hanun at some point should have been like, you know what, I messed up. Instead of doing that, he says, I think I better get ready because there's a war coming. And so he pays other mercenaries. So he has an army of 33,000 that's with him. That reaches the ears of David. David says, okay, I'll send my commander just to let him know, hey, this don't gotta be this way. But when Joab arrives, Joab has the green light, to shoot and kill. And so Joab says, okay, well, we've got two armies here. They split the 33,000. And so Joab takes the front part, Abishai takes the rear part, and before they disband, Joab says to him, hey, remember what we're fighting for. We're fighting for God's people. We're fighting for God. We're fighting for the king. Remember what we're fighting for. Let's keep that in mind. If you need my help, I'll help you. If I need your help, you help me. But let's remember what we're fighting for. And so it seems like all of that from David has, influenced the people he's working with and the people that he's leading.
What, as much as we can see that there's an opportunity for Hanun to essentially backpedal or be like, hey, I took bad counsel, it was an unwise move, like, I'm sorry. That as a new king would essentially be a bad look, because it's like, oh no, I just assumed this position and I'm submitting to another, even though if he's still paying the taxes, he already submitting. So it's just like, oh no, he's a pushover, So he should have done it in private, maybe sent one of his people and just be like, yo, set something up. And David could have been like, I'm gonna send a letter and let's see what's the response. Like, is this what you want to do? Because although he got word, he didn't have to pull up like he did.
Oh no, he had to. There's this saying which is that for as loud as your offenses, your apology should be equally as loud.
Yeah.
And for what Hanun did, when he sent David's slaves back that way, he should have been like, I'm sorry. Whatever it is we need to do to make up for this.
Right.
And the other thing is that Hanun, his father passes away. He's now king. He has these people that give him bad counsel. Sometimes when people go through a traumatic event, they stay stuck. They don't actually move forward, or they don't. It's almost like a reset happens in their life, and they don't know where to go next. So it's possible that Hanun made a mistake, and then it's like, hey, I made this mistake, I took this bad counsel, I got all these people to leave, we still got to pay all these taxes, and my dad is dead, like what will my dad do? And so there's like all these emotions and thoughts and burdens, and in the famous words of Gabrielle Union, sometimes you feel like you got a gorilla on your back. And so I think that's what's happening with Hanun, but while all of that is fine and dandy and we can understand it, we can empathize, we can sympathize with him, David has not reacted swiftly. Right? David could have, at the moment those men came back, at the moment he heard word, all he needed was one confirmation. He could have struck down on these people. Yeah, but instead, he's waiting months for each individual to grow their beard back to full length. He's waiting months. Those individuals are retreated away. And when they come back, he's still waiting because he's not making any swift moves. And I think, again, this is a lesson for us where it's like sometimes people say stuff or do things and we want to react quick. Well, David is slow to anger here. Now, he probably got angry, but he's slow to retaliate or take a decision.
Thinks it through.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that rubbed off on Joab. Because a couple of chapters back, Joab killed the guy, and it was close to a refuge city. And he was like, nah, it don't matter where we at. It's on site, as they say. And that's the way Joab is. But yet, here we hear a Joab where he's like, no, Let's think it through. Okay, there's two armies. Let's divide. Let's conquer. But if you need me, I'm here. And if you need me, or if I need you, you're also there. So we're seeing that kind of rub off again. As we read in the Christian Standard Version or the Christian Standard Bible, anytime you see the Arameans, that is the Syrians. And so, it's a different name that's used for this particular tribe. But what we're seeing is that the Syrians, the Arameans, they're kind of moving ahead. But in verse number 15, it seems that Joab gets the upper hand. Verse 15 says, when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they regrouped. This is verse number 15. Did I jump to 14?
Yes.
I did jump to 14.
Read 13.
I didn't read 13, so let's go back to 13. Joab and his troops advanced. So this is after he gives the motivational speech, if you will, reminding them why they're going to battle for honor of their people and for God and country, as it were. He says in verse 13, Joab and his troops advanced to fight against the Arameans, and they fled before him. So the Arameans, the Syrians, they're running. Verse 14 says, when the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they too fled before Abishai. So Abishai is winning, and Joab is winning, and entered the city. So Joab withdrew from the attack against the Ammonites and went to Jerusalem. Verse 15, when the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they regrouped. So the Arameans, which is the Syrians, they're not ready to lose. They have been paid to do a job, and they are going to see it through. They have been paid. 33,000 men have been paid, or 20,000 from this particular group here, from the Syrians. They have been paid to go to battle, and they're going to go to battle. So in verse 15, after they've been defeated, after they're running away, they regroup. And now notice that it's only the Arameans who are regrouping. The Ammonites, they gone. The Ammonites do. We're not seeing the Ammonites regroup. We're seeing the Arameans regroup. In verse 16, Hadadezer sent messengers to bring Arameans who were beyond the Euphrates River, and they came to Hanun with Shabak, commander of the Hadadezer's army, leading them. So again, we're seeing that the Ammonites, which is led by Hanun, they're gone. They're gone out of the picture. Now it's the Syrians, the Arameans, who are left with this particular problem. And it's Hadadezer who is saying, this ain't done yet. We came out here for a fight today, and today we will fight. And so he sent out for a soldier, for a commander. And verse 17, we're not seeing any retreat here.
At this point, it's no longer about the job that they were hired for. At this point, it's the pride of their people.
Exactly. And so, this is why many times people say when you see a couple of friends or someone has a platonic or romantic relation, when you see them arguing, let them work it out. Because if you get in, then you're going to be left in the situation. And that's essentially what happened here. Yeah. Now Hadadezer is like, oh no, the fight ain't over. We just get started. It's like, bro, they're gone. Hanun and his people have left. And Hadadezer is like, no, but I'm not ready for reconciliation. I'm not ready. And David, in the words of Curtis Jackson, he said, no problem. And so we see here in verse 17, when this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel. Remember, previously he only said the elite people, right? He only said a specific group with Joab and Abishai. But now he said, gather the cavalry, we got to go all in. So when this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Hanun. Then the Arameans lined up to engage David in battle and fought against him. Let's see how it went for them. But the Arameans fled before Israel. And David killed 700 of the charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. He also struck down Shabak, commander of their army, who died there. So 47,000 people died that day.
So when it says that David killed, is it by his hand or by the army's hand?
Yeah, so once the king showed up, all the glory is to the king. Okay. So I would say that he probably was the one who put the quote-unquote nail in the coffin. He's probably the one who actually killed Shabbat. But at this point, he's in the battlefield. How many did he kill? Everyone that died.
Yeah, right. Usually in the battlefield, there's soldiers surrounding the king. Where although the king is fighting, he still is protected.
Right, for sure. They're not gonna. They're gonna protect the king. Yeah, they're not gonna put him at risk. But I think the final blow, he's the one. You know, they probably captured him, brought it to him, and he was like, "Hey, have a good day." You know, bam, and killed them off. But certainly on this day, 47,000 people dies, and Shabak the commander dies. So the death of a commander is a psychological blow to the army, because the army is only as strong as its commander. And so you now have a situation where, what a season. David was he was in a mode where he's giving back. Yeah. Right? He had already conquered everything he wanted to conquer. He had the Jerusalem, which was the capital. He had gained back the ark of the Lord. People were in worship. He had finally completed the promise he made to Jonathan, where he blessed someone from the house of Jonathan, which was Mephibosheth. And he's just in this mood where he's like, man, I'm so blessed, I just want to give back. And someone here misinterprets it, his generosity as weakness. And this is where David is like, well, I guess you might not have heard. And so we're seeing here on a time that David is just giving. He finds himself having to go to battle. And sometimes it's like that in our life. Sometimes we are in a position of peace, in a mindset of peace, and battle ensues. Rather than be spiritual battle, mental battle, emotional battle, economical. And we're seeing David here is ready for those moments. And so I think our duty here is to, in those times of peace, get ready for battle. In those times of battle, make sure that we have the community. Make sure we have the people like we see here that David had. And so we go to verse number 19, because verse number 19 says, when all the kings who were Hadadezer's subject saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became their subjects. So they too started paying taxes to David. After this, the Ammonites, meaning the Syrians, were afraid to ever help the Ammonites, meaning Hanun's people. Right? It's like, yeah, why should they help him? Right? He can't trust them. If they go to battle, they can't trust them. But I think this also...
because they left them on the battlefield.
Yeah, literally left them in the battlefield. Once the Syrians started pulling out, the Hanunites, they were like, oh, that's enough for us to pull out as well. But the Syrians were just regrouping. They weren't going to give up. They were regrouping, so they were all in. But the Ammonites, they were like, oh, this is good enough for us. We've seen enough, and we're gonna get out of here. We're gonna get out of here.
Your reputation precedes.
Real quick. So, a day that starts, a chapter that starts where David is being willing to give and show kindness. Unfortunately, somebody didn't appreciate that kindness, and they saw it as a sign of battle.
And they took his kindness for weakness. Yeah. Because it's like, rather, it's clear that they have heard of David and what he did and how his honor, because I could imagine that the two, I believe it was two deaths that was brought to him as if, hey, we want to honor you, and it's like, okay, well, guess what? You about to die too.
Yeah.
That he's a man of high honor and respect, and he has morals and who he serves. And then it's like, okay, well, you try to be kind, but I don't know if you are.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, well, I'm going to send you a sign, a symbol, and I'm going to return your favor. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's why he sent those men over to Jericho to stay, because he didn't want probably people to be like, your king is weak.
Exactly.
Like they wanted him to see, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
And of course, when we look at David, David is a picture of Christ. And so in this sense, it's like everyone knows about the goodness of Christ. Christ isn't looking for battle with anyone. In fact, the scripture says he doesn't want anyone to perish.
Yeah.
However, if you gotta go to hell, go to hell. And it's like, God would never send me to hell, no, but your deeds would, and he would judge you upon your deed. And when he looks at your deeds and says, hey, guess what? Look like you're going to hell. It's like, well, why would you send me to hell? It's like, that's where you wanted to go.
Yeah. You set yourself there.
Yeah. You know, I was speaking to someone not so long ago where it was like, oh, God's going to send everybody to heaven because he loves us so much. It's like, no, God loves you so much that he wouldn't force you to be in a place you don't want to be. So if you don't want to be with him in heaven, no problem. And Mighty and I were kind of laughing a while back because many years ago I was working at Dollar Tree as an assistant store manager, and there was a person who had came in and he had stopped going to church because one pastor did something to him. He went to another church, another pastor bothered him, and he went to another. And he had been to like 3 or 4 churches in I don't know how many years, maybe 1 or 2 years span. And every pastor that he went to, every church, there was something wrong. And as we were discussing and conversing, and he tells me this, I say to him, no problem. Because I said, you know, you can come back to church. And he said, nah, I'll never go back there either. And I said to him, no problem. No problem. If you don't want to go to church, if you don't want to have a relationship with God, no problem. But please do me a favor. You can go to hell, but don't take your kids with you. Like, go to hell if you want to go to hell. And that sounds horrible. Like, people are like, how dare you? Oh, why would you say go to hell? That's what the Bible says. You know, the Bible goes a little more because the Bible says, the devil your dad. And so, that's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, you know, here we see a picture of Jesus in David, because David, he woke up that day and wanted to bless.
Yeah.
But people who knew his reputation, unfortunately, heard voices out of hell and allowed that to dictate their actions. And in that moment, you know, even though his intentions are to bless, he's a righteous guy. And so I think, you know, as we look at this, we must consider a few things. Number one, our relationship with the king. 2, our relationship with others, because we see the 2 brothers, Abishai and Joab, where they're saying, I'm going to help you and you're going to help me. And then the other thing is the reason that we fight is that what are we fighting for? We saw the Syrians went to battle to help the people that didn't even repay that back. And meanwhile, we saw Joab and Abishai help each other win this battle. And then not only that, we also saw David show up to fight. And so it's very important that in those moments of battle, of difficulty that we may all go through, is like, okay, who do we have in our circle? Who are the people that we're listening to? Who are the people that we have a relationship to? Because otherwise, we may find ourselves like the Syrians, who it didn't start with us, but it ended, and it all ended with a no-so-good situation.
Right.
Amen?
Yeah, when you get in, when they got involved in somebody else's problem, thinking, oh yeah, no, we can definitely profit or gain from this situation. They ended up in debt to someone else.
Yeah.
You know, because if they were paying taxes down to it, it's like we were essentially a free people. We were our own people, and now you put yourself in a position where you have to surrender and honor somebody else.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, you know, that's happened to a lot of us before, where it's like, in the pursuit of trying to help somebody else, we're now left with mud in our shoulders. Like, hey, I was all right before I started sad situation for the Syrians because of what happens to them, but really it's all initiates because someone is in an emotional status where he should not be in the forefront leading. He should be kind of reserved, but people who are supposedly his friend is in a circle and taking advantage, which is what happens to Hanun. I feel bad for Hanun, but you know, let's stand up. Let's make prayer. Amen. Let us continue to pray for one another.